the panel that Dr. Tedros is talking about. Let me find this microphone and get ready to introduce it. First, we have one participating online, and that's Claire Bury, Deputy Director General for Food Sustainability, DG Sante, European Commission. So she's joining us online. And then please join me up here, Dr. Francesco Branca, Director, Department of Nutrition and Food Safety, World Health Organization. Welcome to you. Second one up here is Mrs. Shakuntala Tilstad. You are the Director of CGIAR and also a World Food Prize winner. Thank you very much for being here in the panel. And then we have Lana Wigeland, Youth Representative from the Coalition of Action on Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems for Children and All. And then there's still room up here, and that's because we are also going to welcome the Finnish Minister for Climate and Environment. But he's actually in a meeting right now, so hopefully he's doing good there, no doubt about that, but hopefully he will be joining us. So right now, I will just stay with the wonderful team we have here and start by introducing our first speaker who's joining us online, and it's Mrs. Claire Bury, Deputy Director General for Food Sustainability, as I said, DG Sante in the European Commission. Welcome, Mrs. Bury. Can you hear us in Brussels?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear, Karen. Thank you very much.
Much for joining us. Mrs. Bury, the European Union adopted in December 2019 the Green Deal. And how does it promote the transition of food systems and the adoption of healthy diets within the health, food and climate nexus? And could you also maybe, when you speak now, get the word, please share how the EU food industry is engaged in this process. Over to you, Claire.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, and thanks so much to the organisers for inviting the Commission to be present and for allowing us to do it online as well. So the Nordic Council of Ministers, to Finland and to the WHO, we really thank you for organising this event. So you asked me about the Green Deal, what it does, how it puts together food systems and healthy diets, and what have we done with industry. So since it was adopted, the European Green Deal at the end of 2019 has put sustainability very much at the heart of the EU agenda, and it sets out a strategy to improve people's health and quality of life within the planetary boundaries, and also I think tries to bring together this nexus that you very clearly spoke about, which is healthy diets means a healthier planet, and how does that reinforce itself. So we have something called the Farm to Fork strategy, which is the part of the Green Deal which deals with the agri-food chain and the biodiversity strategy. And these are really the central elements for trying to transform our food systems, make it more sustainable and resilient. A key part of the Farm to Fork strategy is recognizing that we need an increased part of plant-based foods in our diets to ensure that our consumption is in line with nutritional recommendations, but also reducing environmental impacts and reducing life-threatening diseases. And this shift requires the involvement of a wide range of actors. And I have to say that work such as that, which happens under the Nordic nutrition recommendations, is a very, very valuable contribution to this process. But what have we been doing in Europe in terms of engaging industry? We have something which was adopted in 2021, which is called the EU Code of Conduct on Responsible Food and Business and Marketing Practices, which was specifically designed to bring in industry, civil society, international organizations and stakeholders as well, and facilitated by the Commission. And it covers all fields of sustainability. So it's a voluntary initiative which gathers associations and asks them to make concrete commitments to turn EU food systems into sustainable food systems. So now we already have 140 signatories, associations, by and large big companies, and we're hoping to get smaller companies in as well. One of the objectives of the code is to promote healthy and balanced and sustainable diets. So commitments would cover, for example, areas like product reformulation, reducing sugars, salt, saturated fats, increasing fiber-rich grains, nuts and seeds, and micronutrients, very much at the heart of what you've been doing in the Nordic countries as well. Improving consumer information, using consumer-facing nutritional information, improving labeling, education, promoting food education through communication to consumers, but also partnering with schools and educators and families. And hopefully by connecting the dots between this climate action and nutrition, we can make sure that the healthy diets really encourage, promote, move us towards more sustainable food systems. And I think also this is really an example of what we call here the One Health approach, and which we're very much promoting between what happens with people's health, human health, and environmental health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bury. Thank you very much. In addition to what you've said about, well, in general, healthy and sustainable diets, reducing food waste is also key for sustainable food consumption. How is the EU working to reduce food waste also as part of a sustainable consumption and climate agenda? Could you say something about that, please?
Oh. Obviously, certainly in Europe, food waste. I know in other parts of the world, it's food loss that's the problem. Sorry, have you got an echo in the room? That sounds like... No? Oh. Okay, so I'll carry on, but it's... There wasn't an echo on the previous question, but there is now.
You can just carry on because we hear you.
Okay, well, you can hear, okay. So we have in Europe, I'm afraid to say, 58 million tons of food waste every year. We are clearly committed to the SDG targets 12.3 to halve per capita food waste at the retail and consumer level by 2030, and to reduce food losses along the food production supply chains. So to accelerate our progress towards this goal, earlier this year in the summer, the Commission adopted a proposal to put in place legally binding food waste reduction targets for our member states by 2030. We proposed that they reduce food waste by 10% in processing and manufacturing and by 30% at retail and consumption level. Now, obviously, this is at this stage not as much as the 50%, but this is intended as a first step, and by 2027 we will assess progress and then hopefully be able to upgrade and go towards the 50% by 2030. So we want really more ambitious actions amongst our member states. We want them to do it in a systemic way, all working together to reduce food loss, because if we can manage this, it's really a triple win, because we save food for human consumption, we lower the environmental impact of food production, and last, but by no means least, we help businesses and consumers to save money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bury. Very clear messages, and all the best for the very important work. Legally binding is somehow working. So I hope that you will be able, Mrs. Bury, to stay with us just a bit longer, because there might be few questions, and we never know if they are addressed to you. So please, if it's possible, stay with us. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker next to me. You're not only a global leader and an expert on nutrition, but you're also co-hosting this event. So Dr. Francesco Branca, Director of Nutrition and Food Safety with WHO. Can you highlight a number of public policies and strategies that WHO is promoting that can ensure availability and affordability of healthy and sustainable diets for all and everywhere? Large question. Over to you.
Yeah, but first of all, allow me to thank the Nordic Council of Ministers and really echo what my Director General said about the fantastic partnership, and above all for the leadership that you are showing. We need that political leadership in the world for food system transformation. Now, your question is complex, but you already in your introduction gave a hint of what the answer should be, and that is that food and nutrition policies have to have health and sustainability as their objectives. So we need to combine efficient production with affordable nutrition, inclusive livelihoods, and environmental sustainability. So we need action on the supply side, public investment, infrastructure, research, market support. And if you think, for example, of the massive investment which is done in support of food and agriculture, this is about $630 billion every year on average. I mean, this is 2013, 2018 calculation. So, changing and repurposing those agricultural subsidies definitely is going to be an important driver of that transformation. WHO is focused on the policies that shape food environments to make healthy food and drinks more available, affordable, and desirable. So we have, let's say, 5 elements that we would like to really call the attention to. First is the design of the actual products. And I'm pleased that there's a lot of alignment with what WHO is saying and what the Farm to Fork strategy of the EU is also saying. So on the product design, most countries have been able to phase out an unhealthy ingredient, which is partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. We've almost achieved the target of eliminating from the food supply. Salt can be reduced in most products, and then vitamins and minerals can be added to staple food during processing when needed. Second area is the price of food products. WHO recommends to tax sugar-sweetened beverages and foods that are not supportive of healthy diets, and subsidize foods that are supportive. Third is the desirability of products. Marketing foods and beverages directly to children of all ages should be restricted through mandatory policies covering the whole spectrum of marketing techniques, the power of digital marketing. We have to deal with that. Fourth is the actual availability of products. The public sector can use the power of public food procurement to shape the demand for healthy food and benefit school children, and public employees, they use the canteens and public services. But an important component will be the social support scheme. So what is offered and that facilitates the purchase of foods that are in line with dietary guidelines. So food aid should be part of that, in the part of the world where this is needed. And fifth is informing people through education campaign and clear communication, the point of choice, through nutrition labeling that everybody sees and understands. We have seen how important the global processes are, so the UN Food Systems Summit, and now what is being discussed at COP, because at the moment, the food transformation pathways talk about nutrition-sensitive agriculture, awareness raising, food safety, but they don't talk about affordability and accessibility of food of high and unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt. So there's a lot we have to do to reshape those policies.
Well, thank you so much. And those 5 overall advice and targets, fully supported from us, definitely. And then, so to say, the production and consumption of meat and dairy. We didn't talk that much or hear you that much about that. And that's, I don't know if I can use the phrase, it's a hot potato when we discuss this in many countries. And a very wide, different opinions on this one. So some people could say that meat and dairy are the solution to climate change. But we also heard now Dr. Tedros in his opening remarks actually saying that we need a shift towards more plant-based diets. So maybe I would be very curious to hear you elaborate a little bit on where does WHO stand on this theme.
No, thank you. It's an important question, and I know there's been a lot of debate on this in these days, and still is, and it's not going to fade out because it's an important point. But if you look at the burden of disease, and if you look at the reasons why we have unhealthy diets, actually, diets are unhealthy because we have excess salt, sugars, saturated fat. We also have a little bit of excess red meat consumption. But largely diets are unhealthy because of insufficient consumption of whole grain cereals, legumes, fruit and vegetables. So that's why we're saying that a shift towards more plant-based diets would benefit everybody. And would reduce the impact of the environment. Of course, it depends also on production system, use of water. There are complexities there, but the shift towards plant diet is where we have to go. Now, animal source food, including moderate amount of red meat, contribute to healthy diets, particularly in the first year of life. However, we have to know that excess consumption is responsible for excess deaths, particularly cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. So we have an equity issue. So we have in upper middle income countries consumption levels that are high, and then in those countries a small consumption would actually be beneficial to health. We calculated that only a 14% reduction. 14% is not a big amount, would save 65,000 lives every year. You know, there are countries where the average consumption is 713 grams per week. And any health recommendation say that the maximum, really, even the most generous recommendation should not exceed 500 grams. So you see, an average consumption at population level is really exceeding what is the best possible recommendation in health. But then, you know, this would also benefit, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, the use of antibiotics that are used in intensive livestock farming. At the same time, low-income countries, a moderate increase in consumption would be beneficial to children's growth and development as long as it reaches the individuals who need it, and not the segments of the population who are adopting high-income countries' dietary patterns, and therefore would actually be harmed by having increased consumption. So, you know, again, it's a justice and distribution issue.
But thank you very much for elaborating on that one. That's very important. Now I will turn to you, Shakuntala Tilsted. You're the Director, Nutrition, Health and Food Security Impact Area Platform at CGIAR. And also, as I mentioned, a World Food Prize winner back in 2029. Thank you so much for joining us here. The UAE declaration have acknowledged the linkage between sustainable agriculture, resilient food systems, and climate action. So I would very much like to hear you elaborate on what the opportunities are and how we move forward to reach the SDGs by 2030. Please.
Thank you so much for having me here. And the UAE declaration was really, for us working in food systems, a milestone. We didn't think that we would reach so far so quickly, but here we are. But here we are today. So I'd like to make 3 points, and the first one is diversity. We must acknowledge that there is not just one food system, but many food systems. And these are diverse. They must be people-centric, taking into consideration different parts of the population, women, men, and young children, and they must be context-specific. Unfortunately, all these food systems are threatened by climate change and must adapt and transform to being more resilient food systems. One crucial link between modern food systems and traditional food systems and how we transform and facilitate this transformation must be that without compromising the one for the other. Instead of the one displacing the other, we must ensure that they are complementary, building on the strengths, the opportunities, and the capacity presented in these systems to transform towards resilient food systems that nourish all people and our planet without leaving no one behind. The second point I'd like to raise is on innovations. So we must build transformative innovations at systems level, taking into consideration people, culture, and geography. And we must therefore invest in these innovations and ensure that they are both adopted but also adapted to facilitate positive change. One such example I can give is the adoption of agroecology approaches and traditional knowledge. By combining stories and poetry, traditional knowledge and practices with modern-day science and data, we can catalyze change towards nutritious, diverse, sustainable, and healthy diets for all, leaving no one behind. I'd be at lack if I do not include my own area of research, which is on aquatic food systems. As the pressure for terrestrial food systems continue to rise, we must transition and explore other opportunities, including aquatic food systems. Studies have shown that many low-trophic, high-mass aquatic foods, such as seaweed, mollusks, and pelagic small fish, are nutrient-dense and have carbon footprints that are lower or comparable to those of chicken. By investing and managing aquatic food systems sustainably, we can ensure that 3 billion people are nourished, livelihoods of 800 million people are sustained, half of which are women, and that these livelihoods are protected, and that also the health of the planet is sustained by including aquatic food systems. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, because I was thinking here to start by asking you, well, how do we ensure that we leave no one behind? But I really think you kind of painted the whole picture already. But if you have anything to add, please feel free. If there's any more you want to talk about when we have this transition to healthy and sustainable diets. I mean, are we forgetting to think about something? Would you like to add anything? If you don't, I fully understand, because you gave a broad picture. But of course, I can give you the second round.
Yeah, but leaving no one behind is extremely important as we move towards sustainable food systems and as we move towards ensuring that all population groups are well nourished. Culture, stories, and traditional knowledge are important. And we are at the stage, and we are, I think, as a people, smart enough to include new technologies, new data with that of culture and tradition. We haven't yet done so. So we must move forward with that and making sure that they are not lost, but they together form a much greater base on which we can build.
But thank you very much. The whole message about people, culture, and geography, that's very important. Thank you very much for now, Shakuntala Tilsted. And now I would like to turn to you, Lana. Sorry, I probably didn't pronounce it right. Could you help me?
Lana Mykkänen.
Mykkänen. Lana Mykkänen. I'm so happy that you're here on board in this panel, because your efforts and your dedication towards promoting healthy and sustainable diets, also here in Dubai, are quite impressive. And you have said before that healthy, sustainable diets were the top youth priority leading up to the UN Food Systems Summit. So now, could you tell us just more about this youth passion and engagement? We would love to hear that.
Of course. So to set the scene a little bit more with the UN Food Systems Summit that has already been mentioned, there were 5 action tracks or sort of key focus areas, and the shift to sustainable consumption and in that dietary patterns was one of those 5 key areas, in which we also had youth engagement, not only of myself as personally having served as the youth vice chair there, but also a number of other young people that were in the action track, in the leadership team, and actually took it upon themselves to go and write a youth paper demanding political action on healthy, sustainable diets that came out the day of the UN Food Systems Summit. So the the passion was already there from the beginning. And we also had this initiative come out of the UN Food Systems Summit, now called Act for Food. At the time, it started as a global youth pledge about food systems and with actions for change. And there we really saw young people voting around the world on our priorities and also writing and supporting this pledge in which healthy, sustainable diets were one of the key areas that were brought forward. We did have this key moment in the lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit. There was youth engagement in the UN Food Systems pre-summit, which was a large moment in Rome in the process where we had the expectation that a coalition on healthy diets, what is now called the Coalition of Action for Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems, was going to be launched. And for a moment there, it looked like maybe it wouldn't be launched at all when we didn't see it in Rome. And there we really saw how young people know that this cannot be overlooked, because we came together to say this is not acceptable, that we absolutely cannot leave out healthy diets when we move forward with action in different areas. And luckily, we're not the only ones who felt that way, and we did see a coalition that is now moving forward with member states, with civil society, academic institutions, and continuing that work past the summit that took place in 2021. So the reason that we care about this, as young people, we know that food systems are non-negotiable when it comes to successful climate action. Food systems are responsible for 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and we simply cannot afford to not address food systems in our work to fight the climate crisis. And healthy, sustainable consumption is a key aspect of that food systems transformation that needs to take place, that young people are emphasizing around the world, that we are working on ourselves. And so if I can ask a question for the panel as well. One of the aspects I've heard a lot today is, including from WHO, the Director General, and also Francesco here from the European Commission, and from Finland's and the Nordic nutrition recommendations from the Nordic countries, is shifting to more predominantly plant-based diets, shifting in that direction, and also looking at meat and dairy consumption. Francesco mentioned a little bit more. I would be interested in how you're involving leading stakeholders, such as youth and from civil society, in that process.
Well, thank you very much for popping questions back to the panel. Before I give them, could I just, well, I can, because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'd like to just give you just a short follow-up, because I would like to hear you just say just a bit more about the Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems Coalition and what needs to be included in our Healthy Diets approach for successful food systems transformation. If you could maybe say a bit more about that, and then we will turn to the rest of the panel. And by the way, I think our minister is on his way as well, so we'll repeat the questions. But please, over to you, Lana.
Okay, well, you have a little bit of a heads up and some thinking time then. But in terms of the Coalition of Action on Healthy Diets, this is how we are moving forward on this key area from the Food Systems Summit, and making sure that we bring forward that work. Francesco was talking about some of the policy areas that we can do this on, so that includes national food-based dietary guidelines, looking at food in the nationally determined contributions or the country's climate commitments as well. And one of my calls to action in a space like this in COP28 is that we are seeing more of a push for food to be in the national climate plans, especially a food systems approach in NDCs, national adaptation plans, other national climate plans. But we need to make sure that when we call for that food systems approach, that consumption is part of that, and that diets are as well, because while we are seeing more possibility in more countries starting to cover food systems and agriculture, finally, international climate plans, consumption and diets are still far behind in being covered in those spaces. So if we can continue to push that forward, as it is a key aspect of the food systems transformation that we need. So ultimately, to wrap up, member states need to act on the dietary transition. I also want to thank the Nordic Council of Ministers, Finland, and the Nordic countries, which are really leading the way here, setting an amazing example in terms of incorporating this into dietary guidelines and recommendations that we can look at from other countries and other regions. And it's ultimately not just about food production, but about a shift as well. You've transmitted this ask in the UN Food Systems Summit and since then, and we hope that more people will look to this example, including in the national context.
Thank you very much, Lana. Now you popped a question here back to the panel, mainly focusing on the plant-based diet, but maybe we should also, before turning back to the rest of the panel, maybe also look over the audience and give you the possibility now to address this wonderful panel, and don't forget that we also have participation online. So please, Claire Burry, you're still with us. Thank you for being that. I can see there's a gentleman in the first row. Could you please state your name and then your question? Thank you.
My name is Augustine. I am the co-founder of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. And this topic is great for us. We think this kind of session is very, very important. I don't have a question, but I have some comments. I'd like to tell you my story. I'm a village boy. I was born in a village in the northwestern part of Cameroon. In this village, when we ever were hungry as young people, we look up to our mothers and our grandmothers. Whenever we saw our grandmother, we knew there would be food. My grandmother would go behind the house, harvest vegetables, cook for us, and we have it. We never had the luxury of eating meat. Our source of proteins were insects, and probably once in a while during Christmas or when there is celebration, you can have a taste of meat. We thought we were suffering, but now I realize that it was not suffering. A couple of years ago, when I went back to my own village, and I told them that don't look at me, my size, and admire me. I'm suffering. Because our ways of life are actually healthy. People work on their farms, they eat more vegetables, they don't put a lot of oil in their food, and most of the time the food is not with much salt. And they turned at me and said, give us the opportunity to eat the good food that you are eating before we also discover whether it is bad. Today, if you go back to that village, my grandmother cannot afford that food again because the lands are dry or they are flooded. My grandmother cannot have the luxury of choosing which vegetable to cook for her grandchildren because there are floods or droughts. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, we are talking about food systems and climate change. In these negotiations, adaptation to climate change is not taking the central stage the way it should have been taken. African countries are spending their budgets for adaptation more than they are doing for healthcare. They are forced to adapt. Can we just start looking at these things? That doubling, more than doubling of adaptation finance is what we should be putting on the table to help my grandmother grow her crops, grow the food that she needs to feed us and her grandchildren. We should not stop at this. We should go beyond this and do adaptation and provide means for adaptation finance in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I see a raised hand here in the, and also there, yes. Oh, you got the microphone first. Okay, yes, and then it's back over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think we will have, yes, these 3 questions total and then turn to the panel. Please.
I'm Pamphile Wakonduchizamu from Rwanda. And my question is just supposed to be done by the one who represented the World Health Organization as well. In my country, we have a proverb, just I have to translate it. We say that the hospitals don't give the health, they just repair the broken health. And we are becoming what we eat. For instance, if we eat well, we are becoming well or in the health field. So I would like to ask what kind of strategy enforcement for our least developed countries, where we found that hospitals are waiting for illnesses and patients, but not focus on the way to trigger the education, information, communication to the communities so that they can involve in the environmental health, in the sustainable way of preventing those diseases, in a way of just producing in a nutritional sensitive way and protecting the climate and environment as well. I would suggest if there is any political way of enforcing the strategies in our countries so that they may just involve the community behavior change on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then for the last question, second row.
Thank you very much, Karen. So my question is for anyone who wants to pick it up in the panel. I see the thing of healthy diets when it comes to consumers from 2 different perspectives. One is consumers that they can afford to have a healthy diet because they have all the income, and right now probably they don't have a healthy diet because they have over-consuming meat. And consumers that cannot afford because of income reasons, because they don't have the income to afford the healthy diet. And if we see the affordability index for healthy diets, we see that it's worsening when it comes to low-income countries. For the first part, I think we have a lot of tools, from choice editing to regulations to pricing to everything. What about the other consumers, the ones that they don't have actually the option, they can't afford the healthy diet because they don't have the income to do this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefanos. And unfortunately, we cannot run another round, so I think it's important to go on and pass these questions and comments to the panel. Could I start with you, Dr. Branca?
Sure. On the question that Lana asked, who are the stakeholders there? We work with mainly public stakeholders, and these are, of course, government, but also not just national governments, but government at local level. They have a very powerful role to play. I'm thinking about cities, and we have interesting experiences such as the one of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. They've actually been able to change the supply and transform the food system, make plant-based diets much more available, and actually appreciated by the students because to avoid waste. But also public health agencies, and I really would like to give the example of in Australia of Victoria Health, where they have even used innovation and, for example, used the resources of migrant people to set up food hubs and make exactly the foods, particularly plant food, much more available and affordable in response to what Stefano is also saying. Of course, the private sector, civil society organizations, I think it's an important player there is the food banks. Food banks, need to be designed in a way that we can distribute plant food. It's a bit more difficult because of the source of the food, but also the cold chain. We probably need to do more with the producers and particularly the distributors. I think the supermarket chain is a very important role to play. On Stefano's point, the affordability of a healthy diet, absolutely. In fact, that's I think the critical point. And this is not about food prices. Food prices cannot be brought down because we don't want also to penalize the producers there. It's about, to me, it's a social protection issue. It's about also availability in poor neighborhoods. Sometimes it's not just the price, but the availability. There have been interesting schemes in support, for example, of local shops in poor neighborhoods that are supported to provide healthy diet, encouraged to provide healthy diet. And then, all the social protection schemes should have provisions to support the purchase of healthy food and not the purchase of unhealthy food, which unfortunately sometimes is the case.
Thank you very much. I will turn to you, Ms. Burry, because I think the questions on the whole business sector could also be very interesting to hear your reflections on the questions coming from Lana. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like first, if I may, to pick up on the point that was made by the gentleman, his story, the gentleman from the Pan-African Alliance. And the punchline of that was about transition funding and the need for that. And of course, that's something that in the EU we are very much believe in, both in the lesser developed countries, but I think also within the more developed countries, we need to make sure that where there is funding which goes to the food production system, then it really must be channeled now much more into a sustainable food system. So we really need to change the incentives to the way that food production works and incentivize and fund the right kind of change there. On Lana's point about what are you doing on the plant-based diets and how are you engaging people there, obviously it's a delicate operation because of cultural differences. But what we're trying to do is to get out this message about the need for balance. Not necessarily that everybody needs to become vegans overnight, but they need much more balance in their diet. So eating more vegetables, legumes and pulses. And we try to do that through nudging consumers, working more with our member states as well and giving better information. On Stefano's point about sustainable production has to be the affordable choice, I think that really is the challenge. I think that Francesco was giving some thoughts there about how it can be done through the food banks, but I think it also needs to be done more generally. And we always need to keep that principle in mind, and that's what we've been trying to do, that what we want is to make the easy choice, the more sustainable choice, the more affordable choice as well. It's not easy, of course, it's perhaps easy to say that in terms of the mantra, but we really have to try and translate that, and we have to work with industry to do that. I think, as you say, Karen, when we get them to make commitments, we're getting them to make commitments around the reformulation, around the way they give information, but also there is a responsibility on those in the middle of the chain to make sure that those who are at the front of the chain and those who are at the bottom of the chain as well, in terms of the consumers, those who are picking up the food, are getting a fair deal. I wanted, if I may, just to mention in closing two things that I thought was interesting about what Lana said, which was the engagement of youth. At the Food Systems Summit, we saw that very clearly and we really welcome it. We've been trying from the EU side as well. We have something called the EIT, the Institute of Technology, which has a food component, and there we have a youth manifesto. Again, that focuses very much on affordable, sustainable food. It needs to be affordable, it needs to be accessible, and there needs to be a greater awareness. But I really think bringing youth into this is crucial, both in terms of helping us to calibrate the messages. But then the last thing I wanted to mention is citizens in general and bringing them in to get them having a better understanding of what goes on in the food system. Of course, we're all consumers, so we have a certain understanding. But on the food waste issue there, over a period of 6 months, we had several panels. Fortunately, citizens were actually willing to work over the weekends, give us their ideas, and to really buy into this process of what we've been doing on food waste. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Burry. And while we were listening to you, we were also very lucky that we finally now have the Minister for Finland in the panel. Minister Mykkänen, we are so happy that you are joining us, but we're also very happy that you came directly from negotiating and meetings. And I'm trying to look at your face whether or not you look happy or you know, irritated or hopeful or hopeless, but I'll leave that up to you to comment if you want to comment on that, because what I would very much like to hear from you, if I may already, is that in this round we are talking about public policies and strategies that are required to improve the availability of foods that can promote healthy and sustainable diets. And it would be very interesting for us to actually listen to the Finnish approach to implement these targets and these policies in action, both in Finland, but of course also internationally. So please, Minister, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and apologize me for being so late. You know the reason that this is the dynamics of the global climate meetings, and fortunately enough, the presidency now finally managed to table a compromise, which won't be the final one, I would say. Now we had the EU ministerial meeting just where I'm coming from, and definitely we need to get amendments and changes to this text. This is not enough. There's clear majority of global community, global nations, global population understanding that we need to phase out from fossils. It's not an option to lock into a situation where we pretend that we can live as we've used to, and even with using some technological tools to go on with fossils, it's not acceptable, and we need to have this clear. Of course, there is tens of questions in the overall COP conclusions, but this is the core, that we need to have a decisive policy in the minutes of this Congress in this sense, and it's the meaning of this Congress is also to send the message for world audience, especially financial and business community, that if you invest out of fossils, if you invest to clean technologies, then you are on the right side of the history, you are on the profitable side of the history, and if you stick to the fossil economy, then you are on a losing path, and this must be quite clear. Then it's of course details that whether we have certain exact dates or years or so. It's we are already going forward if we say loudly that we believe in a post-fossil world. And overall, I would say that there is many positive sides also from this 7 days or 10 days, how you calculate, but it's anyway the first time in the world history when we are actually seriously drafting texts about post-fossil world and phasing out. It's never been possible, and in current times we are more ripping apart any agreements in the world. We are having new wars, we are disagreeing about trade things, and this must be an arena where we see one dimension of our common activities which we must agree together, and it's climate. And definitely so Finland as a country which is not maybe in the easiest spot also energy-wise, we are a cold country, we don't have abundant hydro resources, for example, as some of our neighboring countries fortunately have. They also share it sometimes with us. We have also been importantly dependent on fossil fuels in 20th century especially, but we are on a path to quite ambitious change. What we've achieved is that we have 95% fossil-free electricity system already. It's a remarkable change in 20 years, I would say. We use nuclear, we use wind, we use hydro, but we've switched already. That heating is now ongoing. Heavy industry is also in a very well-positioned transformation. I think that we are able to speed up even that way to get emissions down. What is more challenging in our circumstances, it's the land use sink, but also when it comes to our item at the table right now, is about consumers and consuming things. And there, of course, food is something which is very core. And also in Finland, if we are thinking about how to go forward with healthy and sustainable living, both its diets and foods are important. And I would lie if I would say that we have some one way forward that, okay, do this, then you will be out of unsustainable food habits or having solved the problem. No. In Finland it has been also a very long path. We actually used to have a starvation of population like about a bit more than 100 years ago, and still when my father went to comprehensive school in 1946, there was very undeveloped circumstances in Lapland, which was also burned those times in the end of the war. But then quite fast after that we developed the free of charge school diets, and I think that that's been actually quite important part of our path towards healthy diets and giving a possibility for each and all to at least have one warm meal per day. And nowadays, of course, even ever more important to have also sustainable diets, and I think that also here one pilot process is schools and how we can change the concentration of the food system there, and that's something that we've been doing also in pilot cases, and now according to quite recent study already almost 100% of secondary schools in cities in Finland serve a vegetarian alternative on a daily basis, so we every day have both veterinarian and other alternative. For example, in second, or actually, well, it's a third largest city in Finland, Vantaa, we have a project where we are piloting 30% smaller carbon footprint when it comes to daily lunches. So it's quite remarkable changes that we can do without significant additional costs. And it's important to share also experiences, and that's why we've joined the Emirates Declaration on Resilient Food Systems, which was launched actually here at COP28, and I was discussing with the Minister of Environment of the Arab Emirates about this project a few hours ago, and actually she was very interested about the Finnish way to do it, and mentioned that she visited Helsinki and also Finnish schools and actually liked the school food so much that she took several portions of the food dose that day for the lunch. So there are some examples how we are going forward, and we've also been together with France establishing the School Meals Coalition initiative, and we would like to do all what we can to maybe also help, but also learn ourselves how to go forward with sustainable diet also when it comes to public ordered food. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. Allow me just a very short follow-up to you, because the Nordic nutrition recommendations, it sounds like you already have them implemented in the school meals, but I would just also, maybe you're talking about the public and so on, but this role of these recommendations to you, I mean, what kind of opportunities do you see in this dietary shift in general, I mean, at large for your country?
Well, yeah, it's an important aspect, and I think that it's been a very important part already for a long time in Finland. The nutrition recommendations. I remember from my childhood when in Finland we visit we have several inspections for small children and their families, and always there were also these diet recommendations given in quite meaningful and understandable format also for a small child, quite small child. And we've now recently published new Nordic nutrition recommendations, as you very well know, and we find it very important that there we have a common scientifically based understanding of the way forward, and it creates basis also for our national dietary guidelines, integrating both health and environmental targets in that sense. And definitely, as I already mentioned, I think that the public food procurement is of course the concrete vehicle then also to actually make to concrete everyday life the nutrition instructions first, and then they will be taken also to private life more easily. So this is probably what we are trying to do, and we are, as I mentioned, we want to stress that there is no clear-cut answers to anything. It's always changing views and learning from experiences from other states. So we are also interested to that. And there is many also alternatives which actually Finland has developed, but is not first of those who use. For example, in Singapore, actually, you can already have ice cream containing solein, a protein which is produced with single-cell organisms and common gases from air by a Finnish company, Solar Foods. And it's about maybe 5 years ago when I remember I was in a campus area in Lappeenranta University, and then there was a container with solitaire Solar Food container where they then said to me, okay, do you want to taste what kind of this, and what is this? This is food from air. So this is not from any farmer, and it was interesting. You can do many things by this kind of smart engineering also. So and also if we're thinking about we are a dairy country, we've been drinking very much milk, and I think that still it's part of the identity almost in Finland that especially children, but quite many adults as well drink milk. And now more and more, of course, development is done by major dairy companies like Valio in inventing plant-based alternatives and using also biotechnology and not the most obvious solutions from here. So I think we really are on a path to different kind of
Thank you.
economy.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and taking, really going on board in the Nordic nutrition recommendations. We are running so much out of time because we have also arranged a whole expert panel. And I'm so sorry that I'm not getting back to the rest of the panel here. And I know that you even wanted to reply some of the comments, but please do that afterwards. So just give a round warm applause to ministers, Minister Adhanom and Lana and Shakuntala and Mrs. Berg online, and also Francesco here. And thank you so much for joining us in the panel. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lawrence Haddad. You're the Executive Director of GAIN. And Lawrence, you are taking over this mic because you're going to guide us through the next panel of this event, focusing on the evidence and the research. So welcome, Lawrence, and you're already waving at the panel. So I think we'll do a very quick shift here. Lawrence, I hand over the microphone, and the water glasses for you are being shifted out as well, so you have clean glasses.
Thank you, colleagues, for staying this long. We are a small but perfectly formed panel. Good things come in small packages. Like the best nutritious foods, we are available, we are affordable, and we hope to show that we are delicious. This is a panel of experts. I like to call them researchers because they're fantastic. We have two fantastic researchers with us. They are Dr. Rune Blomhoff. Dr. Blomhoff is a professor at Oslo University, and he's the project lead of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations from 2023. And we have Dr. Maddie Murphy, who's a senior lecturer and researcher at the University of the West Indies. Let me just make a few introductory comments, and then we'll get right to it. So, food systems. Food systems represent an incredible opportunity, unlimited opportunities. Why? Because we're talking about multiple outcomes: livelihoods, resilience, nutrition, climate, environment. We're talking about multiple domains. It's not just about food production, it's not just about consumption, but it's about everything in between. Processing, storage, transport, finance, marketing, retailing. All of these spaces create opportunities. It's about multiple sectors. It's not just about agriculture or health or social protection or water or trade. It's about all of them. And it involves multiple stakeholders. The private sector is essentially driven. The food system is essentially driven by the private sector. The public sector sets the guardrails, sets the incentives, but the private sector essentially drives it all. But with all of these opportunities, these are only opportunities if we can actually navigate this space, right? It's complicated to navigate this space. There are all kinds of trade-offs. So policy has to be able to navigate it, but it can only do it if it has the evidence, right? We like to think at the highest level, and Minister, I'm not looking at you, the highest level, we like to think of evidence-driven policy making, right? That's what we like to think of. Sometimes we get policy-driven evidence generation. Depends on what the policy is, that can be okay. Sometimes we get fingers crossed policy making. We don't have any evidence. And sometimes we get don't care about the evidence policy making. So evidence is really important. It's not the be-all and end-all of policy. There's politics involved, there's capacity involved, there's timing involved. But evidence is absolutely critical. I don't think there's ever been a premium on good research. I don't think it's ever been higher. So with that, let me, and you can tell I was a former researcher. With that, let me pass to Rune first of all. Rune was the lead author of the NNR for 2023, and these have been regularly updated since 1980. And the current recommendations of Karen in the forward of the recommendation says it's very brave, bravest step yet, to include environmental concerns into food consumption recommendations. So Rune, can you, and as the ICANN report that Dr. Tedros mentioned, very few food-based dietary guidelines do this, very few. So Rune, tell us what difference, if any, incorporating environment made into your findings, and what were the evidence gaps that you most wish you could fill?
In NNR 2023, we needed, of course, to assess a much larger evidence base than in the previous editions with only health outcomes. So environment added a lot to the already huge evidence base of health effects. We needed to add a large number of environmental scientists to our multidisciplinary team of several hundred health and methodology experts. A main conclusion of NNR is that integration of environment support and often strengthen the healthy dietary guidelines. What is good for health is also good for environment. There are little conflict and there are large synergies. We conclude that there is strong and convincing evidence for shift to a more plant-based dietary pattern in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We recommend a predominantly plant-based diet, about 500 to 800 grams of vegetable, fruit, and berries per day. We recommend pulses, potatoes, 90 grams of whole grains per day. We recommend 300 to 450 gram fish per week, 20 to 30 gram nuts per day. All of these recommendations are both supported by health and environment. Then, red meat, we advise that the red meat should be lower than 350 gram per week. That is based on health effects. And then we state it should be considerably lower based on the environment in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We advise moderate intake of low-fat dairy products and minimal intake of processed meat, alcohol, processed foods containing high amounts of fat, salt, and sugar. So then the gaps, the research gap or evidence gap, there are a lot of drivers in the existing food system which is not, that drives the existing food system. So I think we should we should stop or reduce the support of the drivers in the existing food system. The main evidence gap, I think, is now to identify the barriers in the existing food system that resist the shift to a more plant-based food system. Consumer barriers exist in all domains and policy levels of current food system. So I think that is really important. And then integrated and coherent approaches to achieve synergistic effect is needed. We should deal with trade-offs in outcome and address possible reactions that counteract the intended effects. Policies need to go far beyond the information provision to food consumers. The policies behind the whole system needs to be updated and improved.
So thank you, Rune. So I picked up on the gaps, consumer insight. We need more research on what drives consumers to buy certain foods. I picked up policy coherence. How do we make policy a bit more coherent across sectors? Picked up political economy issues. What's driving the food system? And then issues about trade-offs. We don't know enough about the trade-offs. Given that the environment and health and nutrition guidelines were so well aligned, what do you think the prospect, and I'm going a little bit off script here, what do you think the prospect is for recruiting environmental champions to become champions for nutrition? I mean, if these two things are so well aligned, becoming a nutrition champion for an environment champion is one and the same thing, and vice versa. Do you see that happening?
To me, as a nutritionist, it has really been a surprise to see that the food system has not been a big part of the previous COPs. So I'm really happy that it's now improving, and that there was a whole food systems day, and that we are sitting here. So I think there are signs of improving, but there is a lot of options, and there is lost opportunities there that we haven't dealt with yet. So I really hope that the environmental experts and the nutritionists can collaborate much more, because we have a common goal.
Okay, thank you, Rune. Maddie, let me turn to you. You work a lot on small island developing states, and of course these are the most vulnerable, or among the most vulnerable to climate crisis, and often they have this triple burden of malnutrition. And we often treat these burdens of malnutrition as separate crises, and the climate crisis as separate from the triple burden. But it feels like this COP has sort of said we can't afford to do that anymore. So how can an environmental lens, Maddie, help improve nutrition outcomes in the Caribbean and the Pacific? And can a nutrition lens in the other direction, can it actually help the environment?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lawrence, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel this evening. And I think the first thing I need to do is set some context in terms of what has actually happened in small island developing states, such as the Caribbean region and the Pacific region. So as you mentioned, there's lots of vulnerabilities when it comes to climate change. So we have rising sea temperatures that's affecting our marine ecosystems. We have droughts, floods, typhoons, hurricanes that are affecting our food production on land. And while we're having that, we also have this health and nutrition crisis where we are the countries that are most affected or have the highest rates in some cases of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other nutrition-related non-communicable diseases. So for example, in 80% of our SIDS, we have 1 in 6 people who will die prematurely, and that's before their 70th birthday, from an NCD. And the flip side of that is that we have in countries such as Haiti in the Caribbean, and in Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific region, we have 1 in 5 children who experience childhood stunting. So that's the undernutrition side. So there is a lot going on. I work with a group of researchers, the Community Food for Planetary Health group, which is a group of us researchers globally working in SIDS and other small islands as well. And what we do is a lot of work in terms of looking at food systems, and we've done this work over the last 10 years or so with different projects. And you know, it was said before in the previous panel, you know, food systems are different. It's not just all one food system. every country has a different food system, and what we've tried to do is take our time to map out these food systems. So we use a system dynamics approach in doing that, and it's been really quite not just interesting work, but just understanding food systems in different places and the different nuances and things like culture and the social aspects as well as the socio-demographic issues that come with it. It's nuanced, it's complex. And what we tend to do a lot of times is we do group model building. And with this particular method, what we do is we bring different stakeholders, and we've heard this at COP in terms of the need to bring multi-stakeholder engagement, and that's exactly what we do with this type of research, is we bring farmers, food producers, people from government ministries, technical advisors, academics, consumers. We try to bring everyone in the room to say, let's build a map. In our case, because I come from public health, we build that map with the outcome of how do we improve diet, how do we improve nutrition as our end goal. But the idea is then to see what this map looks like for our food systems around diet. And it's always interesting because the maps are usually quite a lot of similarities, but then you see, the little differences in certain places in terms of, especially when it comes to things like culture and gender. But of course, inevitably, there's always a part of the map that is focused on food production, on climate change. And what's nice is that it's a visual where people can actually sit in the room. They've all come together to try to build this map. And you can see the linkages, and you can see what we call the loops sometimes, that the reinforcing loops in some cases, where we can see what's happening and how climate change is feeding into food production, which can then feed into improved diets.
Can I jump in here, Maddie? Because I want to, in Rune's presentation, in his comments, it's pretty clear that climate and nutrition, or environment and nutrition, are pretty well aligned.
Yeah.
And that's often the way the global debate is framed, in a European, North American way. But I imagine in your context, it's not quite so straightforward.
They are quite aligned, but as I said, there are nuances, and every country is different, even within these SIDS, and even when you compare the two regions, the Pacific and the Caribbean, where we've done quite a lot of our work. But what we're seeing is that despite those differences, there are some key takeaways that we can pull out that can work across the board and have some transferability. So, you talked about using this environmental lens versus the nutrition lens, and how we kind of use those to help each other. And because we know it's clear that we want diet diversity, that's our outcome, and diet diversity is really looking at, what's on people's plates, how many different types of food groups do they have on there, and within those food groups, how many different types, whether it's, leafy greens or whatever it may be. But those kinds of takeaways where you increase the diet diversity, that's what we want for better nutrition. But that also then comes around to increasing our biodiversity. And when you increase the biodiversity, we're then going to have better soil quality, better water quality. The idea is that we're really integrating agroecological approaches. So from where we started with our research, we have now gone to a point, we started off really looking at nutrition and health and saying, oh yes, agriculture can help us. We now have a much better understanding of how agroecological principles underpin and can help with the research that we're doing, and we've brought that into the fray, so that now we're not just looking at human nutrition, but we're looking at planetary nutrition and how that circle continues in a positive way.
Thanks, Maddie. Rune, the Nordic Nutrition Review is an incredible process and an incredible report, but I imagine it's pretty resource intensive, and it draws on decades of investment in research. In contexts that have less resources, have less of a research body to draw on, how useful, how relevant, what are the lessons from the NNR process that can be taken or picked up by other contexts?
Of course, the NNR is science advice to the national authorities in the Nordic and Baltic countries, but we suggest that it also offers a framework for other countries and regions, since the health effects of foods, they are universals. Food have the same, with few exceptions, the same health effects on people in all countries. And most of the environmental effects of foods are also global. So, and additionally, development of authoritative high-quality systematic reviews are really resource demanding and methodologically also very challenging. So, and this calls for international collaboration and harmonization. So when this is said, it's also important to remember that the national dietary guidelines must take into account the local context, such as food culture, food availability, public health challenges. So while affluent countries need to move towards a more plant-based food system, situation might be different in other countries where undernutrition is widespread. So this is why one example why the local context is so important also to add, while the science base for health and environment is the same. And finally, I would also like to add that other dimensions of sustainability also are important to consider, such as social sustainability and economical sustainability, of course.
Thank you, Rune. And you mentioned culture, and I want to come to you, Maddie, finally on culture, because in your work you argue for, not just focusing on individual choices and individual responsibility. I'm getting two fingers. I hope that's in a good way from our moderator over there. You talk about culture. Individual responsibility can only go so far if the culture around you gives you limited choices. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of work to be done around our food environments. I think we've had such a focus on individuals and expecting consumers to make certain choices, but we're not really giving them food environments to make good choices. So, it's about having policies in place that really help our food environments. In Barbados, where I'm based, for example, we have the sugar sweetened beverage tax. And that's something that came with, a lot of, fanfare and controversy in terms of a small island doing this and what that means. But the fact is, it was done, and it could be done even in a small island where you expect that, politically and with developed countries and big companies coming in, that this would be something very difficult to do. The reality from a consumption point of view is that food is driven by affordability, accessibility, availability, and quality, and that's the nutrition quality. And what we're really trying to do is focus on that quality piece. We want to get better food environments, better nutrition. But the bottom line is consumers are driven by the affordability. That's what we've heard, and that's what we know. So it's about balancing that scale and finding that balance. We need to have, strong leadership and strong policies that speak to things, especially, I haven't heard as much in the events I've been to at COP around trade. But, for example, in SIDS, 60 to 90% of our food is imported. So, a lot, when we talk about food environment, we have to then really take a hard look at what we're bringing in, and whether it's we take bold moves with policies in terms of, the same way we're looking at banning trans fats. Do we ban certain types of ultra-processed products that we know are completely unhealthy for our populations? So I think there's still some work to be done in the policy arena, but I think we really need to take a little shift in terms of where we're looking at. And we also need, even if we're looking at things like trade, I think that that siloing, we need to get away from that. And clearly that's not just in SIDS, that's everywhere. But this idea that you really need health, you need climate change, you need different players, multi-sectoral players, when we're creating policies to really understand the nuances of what's happening in different systems.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, panelists. Let me just wrap up. I thought both your contributions were fascinating. Thank you. Look, aligning food, nutrition, climate, environment is a job for not just policymakers, it's a job for businesses, consumers, and researchers. The Nordic nations have given us a really inspiring model. The SID situation is really challenging, but Maddie has given us hope that there's a way to navigate that. And I love the fact that you brought in trade policy. We haven't heard much about that in this debate. It's really, really important. I hope you can agree with me, colleagues, that without evidence, we are just flying blind. And the stakes are just far too high to do that. So please, round of applause for our panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lawrence, Rune, and Maddie. This is really interesting, and you really, also you gave us food for thoughts. What a rich and diverse discussion we are having here tonight. And time is really running, so I have an absolute pleasure to end this session by giving the floor here, the microphone here, to Ms. Helena Teklu. You can now come up to me and take over here and give us your final remarks, because Mrs. Teklu is a champion of climate change, a youth ambassador, a climate reality leader, and so much more. So I'm very grateful that we do have young leaders like yourself here at COP. So please, could you reflect on what you've heard here tonight and also give us your vision of what needs to be done moving forward? Tekla, the floor is yours, and you have absolutely no more than 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Helena Teklu from Ethiopia. And as we all know, climate change has a significant impact on the availability, accessibility, and nutritional quality of food, which in turn can affect individuals' ability to maintain a healthy and accessible diet. And so, what strategies can be implemented to address the effects of climate change on food security and accessibility of nutritious foods? To mention a few, working on implementing sustainable water management practices such as rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, and efficient water use, improving food shortage and distribution infrastructures can reduce post-harvest loss and ensure a more reliable food supply. And promoting nutrition education and awareness can help individuals make informed dietary choices. Also, governments and international organizations can implement policies that address food security in the context of climate change. So in order to mitigate health impacts, public health initiatives and equitable access to nutritious food plays a crucial role. By implementing these strategies, it's possible to work towards a more resilient and sustainable food system. The youth is the future, and they need to be included in solving climate change, food security, and health. As a young entrepreneur, I believe we, the youth, have the power to challenge social norms, promoting attitudes and behaviors that prioritize sustainability, health, and food security. By promoting inclusivity, diversity, and equity, we can foster a more resilient and sustainable society that benefits everyone. In conclusion, to address the impacts of climate change on healthy and accessible diets, it's essential to implement strategies that promote sustainable agriculture, food security, and equitable access to nutritious foods. This may include supporting climate-resilient agriculture, agricultural practices, improving food distribution systems, promoting nutritious education, and advocating for policies that address the intersection of climate change, food security, and public health. By taking a holistic approach to addressing the impacts of climate change on food system, it is possible to work towards ensuring that individuals have access to healthy and accessible diets, even in the face of challenging times. As I always say, change begins at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Maybe I stressed you because you speak very fast, but very important messages from you. Thank you so much. And also, time is up now, and I really want to thank all of our speakers, and thanks to the audience that showed up here today, and also all of you following us online. We know that the online connection in the beginning with the very important message from WHO was not really getting through to the online audience. So I think what we should do, because we have 1 minute or maybe 2 minutes left, is it possible that we can run the video again from the WHO Secretary General? We can. And the audience, you've seen it before, but you can see it again, and then our online audience can see it. So having said that, just thank you all. We are looking forward to the continued collaboration. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Minister Yasmin Fuad, Your Excellency, Minister Kai Mykkänen, Secretary General Karen Ellemann, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Our food systems are harming the health of people and planet. Food systems contribute to over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and account for almost 1/3 of the global burden of disease. Transforming food systems is therefore essential by shifting towards healthier, diversified, and more plant-based diets. If food systems delivered healthy diets for all, we could save 8 million lives per year. Nordic countries have been trailblazers for many policy breakthroughs, including for linking climate and nutrition. Thank you for your leadership in this area and for organizing this discussion to share experiences and lessons learned. WHO is committed to supporting countries to develop and implement policies to improve diets and fight climate change. Last year, under the leadership of the Egyptian COP27 presidency, WHO and our partners launched ICAN, the Initiative on Climate Action and Nutrition. The ICAN baseline report currently shows low integration of climate and nutrition in policies, in funding mechanisms, and particularly in the private sector. I'm therefore very pleased that over 130 countries have signed the COP28 UAE Declaration on Climate and Health. Together, we can protect and promote the health of both people and planet. I thank you.